I'm Madison, and this is my good friend Allie, and she is an amazing lawyer with Creatives Learn Law. And so, I guess does that mean that you kind of have like an educational aspect with your business too?
Yeah, so I think that their lawyers get kind of a reputation for being advocates, right? Or that's, I think, how a lot of people think of the legal profession. But I think for small business law, the most important thing that we do is we teach our clients how to take ownership of their own small business legal issues. So when we represent clients, I think of that as educational work, but also we teach a lot of classes and just try to keep people involved in what's going on the legal side of their small business.
That's so helpful because I guess just as a photographer myself, I think law and anything like legal really scares me. Just because I don't really know anything about it. I don't know how it works. I have a contract that I got from online that I just kind of put together. So I'm really excited to chat with you today, just kind of talk about some of the things from photography. And we're going to kind of like back end work this because obviously I'm a photographer, not super versed on the legal issues. Allie was also a photographer, which is really helpful because she kind of knows exactly like what photographers are looking for. And obviously, you know, not everybody in the group is a photographer, but when you're starting to use like all these branding images and everything, I think it's really important to kind of talk about both sides of like, you know, you as the user and then like the photographer and why they have certain things in their contract. So then when you are hiring or when you're buying photos or using them in any way, then you can kind of get a feel for, am I breaking the law or not? And then that's just covering your business. You know, it's the CYA aspect of being a business owner. So if you guys have comments or anything like that, drop them below. Hi, Lori. Hi, Gigi. I'm excited to chat. I will do my best to kind of moderate comments and bring it into Allie's questionings. And yeah, so are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. I just want to say that you're not alone, Madison. I feel like the thing I hear the most from people is overwhelm. Like they don't like to think about business law issues because they're like they don't think about them enough and they're kind of worried about what they'll find. Same
Yes.
people can say the same things about money, right? Like they don't
Yes.
want to like put their business budget together because they're worried they're going to discover there's not enough money. But I actually do think that for small businesses, like especially unregulated, photography businesses, consulting businesses, it's really easy to get a handle on the most important legal issues in just a couple hours. And so people usually feel better when they learn about what they don't know.
Yes, and like actually one of the questions which we'll talk about later is just kind of like what are the bare bones minimum that I need to like survive? And I think legal is it can be kind of similar to insurance in that you're like I don't need it until you need it.
Yeah.
And then that's like too late, right? And so
Yeah.
you know, I think it's something that you're just like you're kind of hesitant to spend the money on because you're like, I've been operating totally fine for the last 5 years with no issues until you have like something happen where you're like, well, now I feel like I should have protected myself a little better.
Yeah. Yes,
So
I tend to agree, but I'm obviously biased. So
well, I'm glad that I'm not alone though. That makes me feel better. Okay, so let's talk about if we're hiring somebody for a branding session. Obviously, this is a branding through photography Facebook group. So if we're hiring somebody, let's just kind of talk through some of those scenarios. Like, what kind of rights, usage rights, and everything should we be looking for that?
yeah, that's a great question. And I think sort of the baseline thing to understand about image use rights or any sort of intellectual property use rights, so whether you're hiring a copywriter or a designer or a photographer, image rights can be defined any way that you want by contract. So if you don't have any contract in place, and a contract can be that formal document that a lawyer wrote or that looks like a lawyer wrote, or a contract can be emails that demonstrate you guys are on the same page about something. It doesn't have to be that formal document. But if you don't have anything in writing or you don't have anything that demonstrates an understanding of what the image use rights are going to be, then by default, the image use rights or the content use rights are solely with the creator. So you want to get something that just explains and it sets everybody's expectations. And if you set your expectations orally, like by a phone call, then just memorialize it with an email. that just says like, here's how I expect to use my images, or here's how I expect to use the copy that you write for me. I understand that these uses are prohibited. So typically, if you're working with a contractor that is experienced and pretty well established, then they're going to have a use right section in their contract, and it's going to be really well defined. And the most common, there's two really common approaches for photographers in particular when it comes to image use rights. One is that whatever they deliver from your session, you can use commercially, usually any way that you want, but sometimes you can use them commercially for web use and social media use, but not for print advertising or not for billboards. So you can get really granular. So if a photographer wanted to say, your image use rights are included for standard Facebook posts, but not for paid, boosted, or promoted Facebook posts, they could, and they could charge a separate use rate for that. So you just want to see what that language says, and you want to make sure that you're on the same page with you and your photographer. And I mentioned there's sort of two business models. One is where people kind of give the use rights along with the digital images by default. And then the other is where the photographer will deliver like a proofing gallery, and you'll have a certain number of selects, and you only have the rights to those selects, or you'll get or you have to buy the images separately after you see them, and you only have the rights to the images you buy. So it's copyright infringement, and it could be very costly if you are working with a photographer with that business model and you go in and start screenshotting images that you didn't buy and then using those images. So basically, I think the important thing to remember is that image use is governed by the agreement that you make with the person who creates your images, or if you're the image creator, then your client's rights are governed by that agreement that you make with your client. Okay. So make the agreement, make it clear, like make it be what you want it to be.
So, okay, that's a good question, or that's a good point then. When you, hold on, I kind of like lost my train of thought. I know, I was like, so when they have like, say someone buys my images and they have, it's like the commercial use one, and they just get the images. Do I still have rights to the image as the creator?
Yeah.
Can I use them in any way?
So do you still have rights to the image? Yes, unless you give away your copyright, which you can do in a contract. You can say, I give full copyright to my client. Okay. Most commonly, the photographer will have a contract that says the photographer owns the copyright and the client can use the image in X, Y, and Z ways. That's called a license, where you give somebody permission to use something that you have copyright to. But there's two separate bundles of rights that we're interested in. There's the creator's rights for the image, and then there's the person who appears in the image. So I'm assuming we're talking about like headshots or photos where your client is appearing in the image. So people who appear in images have rights that you can't just go and use any image you want of someone for advertising. So for example, like I think we can all agree that we might be uncomfortable if we, like Coca-Cola could just photograph us, outside of McDonald's on the 16th Street Mall and then put us on a billboard. Like we don't maybe want that. And the reason that we legally that you can't do that is because people have a right to their own publicity. It's a little fuzzy because there's also the First Amendment, right? So like if a newspaper photographs you on a street corner, they can put you in a newspaper and that doesn't infringe on your publicity right. But when we use images for advertising or promotional purposes, we want to be really careful to make sure that our client or whoever appears in those images, the model, has released those publicity rights. And that's what a model release does. So most commonly, when I set up contracts for commercial photographers, there is a clause that says the photographer gives a license to the client for A, B, and C uses. And then there's a model release clause that says the client grants the photographer and gives the photographer the right to grant third parties the right to publish the images that have the client in them.
Okay. So can we just break this down into an actual situation? So say I'm a health coach and I hire a photographer to take pictures of me for my business. And this is to, just all around general use of like, I want it for my website. I want it for print materials. I want to give it to, clients, all those things. So that would be, I need at least the commercial usage right. The photographer may keep some of the right. I mean, unless they like physically write out, like, here's all of it. they're still going to retain some rights to use it for their advertising and for their like websites,
Mhm,
which that feels kind of typical for me.
mhm,
You also, or me also, as like the client, would sign a model release saying that that's allowed.
mhm.
Now, what if like the health coach gets featured in, a big article or something like that. And then, and then like it goes into a magazine. Can I use those images or how does that work?
It's going to totally depend on what the contract says.
What if
So
it's like not mentioned in the contract? Is there like a default
So
thing?
if it's not mentioned, if image use rights are not mentioned at all in the contract, you need the photographer's permission because the assumption is that the photographer holds the copyright and you don't have any use permission unless you get that use permission from the photographer. So if there's just no mention of image use in the contract and you don't have an email with your photographer where they give you permission, you need to get that permission.
Okay.
But what you'd be looking for in the contract would be a sentence that says that the photographer gives you the right to use the images to promote your business and gives you the right to grant third parties the right to publish your image.
Okay, cool. And then the same kind of goes with photographers' rights too. Like they can send their work that they shot of you to a magazine to be featured as well.
As long as they have yes, they can because they own the images unless they've given away copyright. The photographer would be concerned with making sure that you have released the right to publicity. If the client, so the health coach is appearing in the image and you can see their face and it's going to go in a magazine for promotional purposes and for commercial purposes, then the photographer needs that model release.
Okay. Okay, cool. Does everyone understand that? Because I know that can get kind of like, so if you guys have questions, drop them in the comment. We can like come back to it. So I think we've kind of already covered, like the verbiage we should be looking for. You need, the like like the commercial use rights, um, that kind of the model release, that kind of stuff. Then should we like, are there any like red flags that we should be looking out for? Is there anything that's like, nah, that's not how it should be done?
Yeah. Oh, so my least favorite contract clause is if I see a non-disparagement provision in just like a clause that a service provider gives to their client. So a non-disparagement provision is a provision that says you agree not to say anything bad about the other party to the contract.
No.
Non-disparagement provisions are super appropriate if you've gotten in a dispute with someone and they're giving you a refund to settle the dispute. Like
Mhm.
if they're buying your silence, I feel fine about that. But if somebody's putting just a non-disparagement provision, so like you hire a consultant and there's a provision in there that says you're not allowed to write them a bad review, that's to me that's really bad form.
Yeah.
It's also in a lot of instances against federal law, so I hate those provisions. I don't like seeing them in contracts because it makes me question the other person's business practices. But yeah, that's my I feel like I'm a soapbox about that. That's my least favorite contract
I think
provision.
that's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah. But people have a lot of flexibility about what they put in their contracts and don't put in their contracts. And in general, I think you just want to make sure you understand it. And for photographers, that like image use rights and understanding if you have the use rights you want, or if you have to buy them separately. Like I know that tends to be an issue for clients pretty regularly that they don't understand that.
Well, and like I think about influencers, like I listen to some influencer podcasts and stuff like that. And, they get these brand deals where pretty much they'll go and do like two posts and then that brand has access to that image for a year
Mhm.
and stuff like that. Now I feel like that's like super over my head when it comes to me coming up with a contract to give to a client, like as the photographer. So I'm just like, just take it. But I think like that's another thing too. It's like once you get kind of into some of those photographers where they start giving you like a year of usage rights or something like that, like where does the timing come in? Like I guess, when do photographers start adding that into their contract? And like what kind of terminology is that when we should be like looking into it to make sure that we have kind of like for the life of however long we want to use these images? Like when does that come into play?
So I would encourage small business owners to ask for no time limits in their contracts, because that is a lot to manage. Time limits absolutely happen in commercial photography and in commercial use rights clauses. I think that it can work for really big brands who are working with really big photographers, right? So if you're Annie Leibovitz and you're selling rights to use an image to Disney World, totally reasonable that Disney World is going to use them for magazine campaigns and for TV ads, and they have the permission to do that for 18 months. If you're a small business owner who gets branding photos once a year and you're using them on your Instagram feed and your website, you do not want to be in a contract where a year from now you have to go take your pictures off your website. It sets you up for problems, especially because when I think about the way that I operate my business, like we give our graphic designer all of our images, and we're like, use what you want, and it's just too much to manage. So I would definitely avoid contract clauses like that. But when you work with really big brands and they have a cadence that they always refresh their marketing is seasonal. That makes sense for them, but you certainly, as a small business owner and as a photographer who works with small business owners, policing that seems unmanageable to me.
Yeah, I mean, especially like, oh, I bought this image 9 months ago. I've got, 3 months left before it's over. It's just that seems hard to keep up with, especially when I'm like, what day is it today? So I feel like if it says anything about timing in there, like the time of usage rights, I would question that, or I would be like, that's more than what I'm willing to do. Okay, cool. So, and then can we talk a second about like the watermark situation? If the photographer gives you, like, I know that I do this and I'm kind of moving to not doing it anymore just because I'm like, they bought the images, but there's a huge debate within the photography community of like, do I add logos? Do I not add logos? Because, they're not going to give me credit if I don't. But then at the same time, they bought the images. Can we just talk a second about it? Because I know that I have like a clause in there where you can't alter it, meaning like you can't put filters on it, you can't crop it. I do not enforce that at all. Like, I'll just tell you right now, like if you crop out my logo, I don't really care. I mean, it doesn't matter to me, but I think some people really do. If you get images where it's like the low resolution that you can post online and they have logos on it, is it okay to use the high resolution images that don't have logos and like downsize it and just like put those online, or can you crop it out? What does that look like, and how big of a deal is it if you were to like break those rules?
Yeah. So really good set of questions. As Madison has taken my jobs before, so as she's talking, I'm like, have I ever cut Madison's pictures to a square and cropped out her watermark?
And like, if you did, I wouldn't even care. Like, I would
Oh.
send you the other ones without the logo because I'm like, you bought the images. Shouldn't my job be done at that point?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a lot of these questions are business practice questions. So what do you, as a photographer, what do you want to do as part of your business practices? As a client, what are you willing to agree to with your photographer? And again, you're going to make those decisions in your contract. If your contract is silent, then by default, if you've only given somebody use rights, like you've given them use rights, but you haven't spoken to whether or not they can modify it, the default assumption is that's a separate, the right to edit things, like that usually doesn't come along with use rights. That needs to be granted separately. But people haven't had a lot of chance to fight about things like, well, if I take my Instagram, I take my landscape photo, post it to Instagram, and it goes to a square because that's the format. Is that going to be a contract violation when you've given me social media use rights? Like,
Yeah.
that probably not, but we don't know.
Yeah.
But in general, if you want the right to edit your images, you should separately bargain for the right to edit your images. You should make sure that you get that right. If you don't have that right, then it is both in line with your contract and a courtesy that you just don't edit your photographer's images. You do your best to post them in as close to the original format as possible. If they've given you watermarked images, you use those when you're doing web use stuff. But there's also, from the client side, you want to make sure in your contract that you're not obligated to use an image with a big watermark on it on the homepage of your website when you're trying to, you're trying to brand that your business. So I think there's a lot of professional courtesy. Like whenever, as a small business owner, it costs you very little to just tag your photographer in the last line of your Instagram caption, or or on your Facebook post, and that's going to maintain good professional relationships. It's going to be better exposure for your photographer than a watermark anyway, because people can click through.
Yeah.
So from my perspective, like sometimes we all forget, but in general, no reason not to do that stuff as a client. And when I talk to my photographer clients, I basically tell them you have two choices when people don't, if they add a filter to your image and it makes you look bad. You can be the kind of person that polices that stuff. And if you're going to be the kind of person that polices that stuff, you need to be setting expectations with your clients really clearly up front.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can charge your clients enough money that you walk away from an interaction with your client thinking that you've been paid, you've been compensated fully, and that any referrals you get from your client tagging you on social media, or any positive publicity that you get from your client posting your image without like a Valencia filter on it, like that's all bonus, right? And that's
Right.
what I would like all my clients to do, is think of that as bonus, and that they've already been paid for their work, so they don't need to worry about, if you're undercharging people, if you're charging people like $150 because you're expecting the exposure to pay off, then you better be really clear with your clients and explain to them, like, this rate assumes that you help promote my business. If you don't help promote my business, or if you go out and share images that you've trashed in Photoshop, like there's going to be problems.
Yes.
Because if your clients have paid you well and have paid you a fair rate, then you're not going to want to jeopardize the client relationship by constantly DMing them about the filter that they put on your picture.
I mean, and I think that's a good point for anyone with contracts. It's like, it's just like pay, like get the money that you want. So then when you walk away from the job, there's no resentment. There's no like, oh, I need this and this and this. It's like you get paid and then you move on and then just let them do what they're going to do.
Yeah. And I think if it's really important to you, like it really pains you to see your images edited badly, then to have that conversation with clients up front. Don't let your contract do the work for you. Like have a conversation with them where you say, I love seeing you share your images. It's important to me they're not edited, and here's why. But you don't want to ruin, I think your best source of referrals from your clients isn't going to be some random person that sees their Instagram tag. It's going to be the people that they talk to. And if they say, I had a great experience with Madison, you should totally hire her. These are all the reasons I really liked her. And in those relationships where they have trust with their friends and with like their close colleagues, that's where you're going to get referrals. And don't ruin your rapport with your client
Yeah.
when just because they put on a bad filter doesn't mean they don't love your work. Like people just
Yeah.
like
No, I mean, and they just have different stuff. Like people are just, they just do that kind of stuff.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
everyone has a different style, and you hope that when they hire you as a photographer that they understand that style, but that's just the way it is sometimes. Okay, so I have two questions from that just came in. So Gigi asked, the only time I use a watermark is if I post to my website and social media sites. My clients who purchase the photos get the photos without the watermark. Is that okay to do? So Gigi, I'm assuming you're a photographer then.
yeah. You can do watermarks. You can do anything you want. You can use them. You can not use them. You can put in your contract that your client agrees to share watermarked images only. Yep, absolutely anything you want. I do think there's definitely some benefit to having a watermark on an image, because if something gets picked up, right, or if it goes viral and then it's getting shared outside of like typical sharing channels, right? So people aren't just pushing share on something, but they are like downloading it and re-uploading it. That's a good idea to have a watermark there. But also, like if you're someone that's like, that's too much work and it's not in line with my aesthetic, totally a business decision, and either way is fine. It does not affect your copyright to have a watermark or not to have a watermark. Either way, you retain the rights to the image.
And then, okay, going back to the healthcare professional thing, like if I have my own logo and then I slap that on an image that I bought, like I from a branding session, and I put my own logo on it, is that okay to do?
So again, you would want to look for that right to modify the image in the contract.
Mhm.
Um, I think that there's also, it gets a little bit tricky, right? Because are you modifying the image, or are you putting the image, for example, if you're putting it on a PowerPoint slide as the background of the PowerPoint slide
Yeah.
and then putting text over it, like whether or not that's image modification is not really entirely clear. But I wouldn't like put your photographer's images in Photoshop or InDesign and start adding logos unless you've got permission, or Canva, unless you've got permission from your photographer to do that. But typically, like, especially if you're doing it on social media and you're tagging your
Right.
photographer and being courteous, and your photographer is a branding and commercial use photographer, like that's usually going to be expected, but it would be safest to make sure that you have permission to do that in a contract, or that you just email your photographer and say, hey, I want to add my logo to this image so that I can use it in this capacity. Are you okay with that? Here's how I'll give you photo credit, as a bonus to incentivize them to say yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so then that makes sense. I think the biggest part here is just like there's no right or wrong answer if it's not in the contract, but just be like courteous to the other person, give them a heads up call, or check in and see if they're okay with it, and
Yeah.
that will kind of help you. And then also that kind of leaves a paper trail of like we had this conversation, they were cool with it, they can't come back and like sue you or something like that.
Absolutely.
Okay, and then Lori asks, can that apply to content as well, giving someone a discount or free services with the expectation of testimonials?
Yes, absolutely. You just want to have that as part of your contract. So you want to explain to your client, like, I'm giving you this rate. The rate assumes that share your testimonial in the following way, or the rate assumes that you post about me on Instagram, or whatever it is. You just want to set that expectation. If you give people a discount with the unspoken expectation that they're going to promote your business, or that working with that person is going to be good for business because they're high profile, and then they don't tag you or they don't refer you, then you're going to, like, that's an invitation for resentment, I think. So just like make it explicit, just explain to them, I'm like so excited to work with you. I'm giving you this discounted rate. In exchange, this is what I'm asking for.
And I think that kind of goes into just like contract usage in the first place. I get a little hesitant sending out contracts for like really basic, simple, quick sessions because I'm like, this 20-minute contract, does this 20-minute session, does that justify an entire contract where it's like 3 pages of legal jargon where it's like a model release and all of these things in it. And it kind of just makes me like scared to send it. But I think at the end of the day, it's protecting, like it's maybe making yourself look more like a actual setup established business where you've got all this stuff in place. Is that, I don't know. What do you think?
I absolutely agree. And I think that, you know, we think of contracts in the creative industry like sort of as this scary, like, long document that is sort of hard to understand. But in reality, a contract is just an agreement between two people, and a contract will exist whether you put terms in writing or not. If somebody gives you money and you give them services, there's a deal, there's a contract. So you just want to be clear about what the terms are. There are ways to make it, I send my clients a hello sign, e-signature standalone email that they have to do to onboard with me. When I ran a photo business, I used Dubsado, and they had to sign a contract that again came in a separate email. But things like, I think Honeybook has a proposal where you just click through and it's like, here's the price, here's the terms of use, here's the invoice.
Mhm.
That feels a little bit less intimidating.
Yeah.
I have also just copied and pasted terms of use into a Square invoice before, as long as people have an opportunity to read those terms, and then
Oh,
they can just pay the invoice to accept the terms. Like, you just say, by paying this invoice, you agree to the following terms.
okay.
That can be really useful for like $200, $300 jobs where you don't want to intimidate somebody with a 3 page
Yeah.
contract.
Okay, good. That's a really good point. Because I think that stuff's intimidating where it's like one more barrier to entry of like them hiring you. It's like now fill out this thing and it has like terms in there where you're like, I don't know if that is going to upset them or not. So, then you just don't do it at all. And then you're like, oh.
Yeah.
So
And I think that that's one of the big benefits of working with a lawyer, right? Instead of buying a contract, is like, I've helped clients where I'm like, okay, you have this 10-page contract you use when you charge clients $4,000 to redo their website, but then you have this one pager that you want to use when you charge somebody $150 for a quick illustration.
yes.
So you can kind of customize those types of documents. I also, when I send contract as a photographer, when I would send contracts to clients, I always said, I have a contract here. Please let me know if you have any questions. Happy to discuss any terms. So you have to feel comfortable saying that. But especially things like a model release or image use rights, like, clients have a right to bargain that kind of stuff with you, right? Like they can ask you to change it. And so I think inviting them and letting them know that you're excited to work with them and they should reach out if they have a problem with your terms can help too.
Yeah, that for sure. I mean, and kind of since we're already heading this way, let's just kind of jump into contracts really quick. Um, so can you tell us like a little bit about how you like approach drafting contracts for small business owners to use with their clients and customers? Like, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So contracts can be anything that you want. Like I mentioned, they can, they don't have any sort of required format. But the way that I like to approach contracts is there's an introductory section where it talks about, the price, or it might refer to an invoice if you have the price in an invoice instead of in the contract, and exactly what services the service provider is going to provide. And it just makes what's the exchange. It makes it really clear, and it identifies the parties, the client and you. And if you have an LLC, you need to identify your LLC as the party, not you as an individual. So that's the recitals, the first paragraph or so of a contract. And then I get into the details of, here's the fine print of how I provide my services. So if you're a photographer, this is what I do and don't do as far as image editing goes. These are the delivery timelines. Just the stuff that's about the actual project that you're working on with the client. And you also have a section in there about what your client needs to do to make the project a success. So your policies about on-time arrival, your policies about like your client's responsibility to choose wardrobe or anything like that. A lot of people, these sections that describe the services they provide and the things their clients need to do, those are informed by bad experiences from the past, right? So
I've got some like wedding instances in my head where they're like, everyone's drunk and
yeah.
they can't do anything for photos. And you're like, well, you have to be
Not
able
my
to
fault.
have these photos taken. All right.
Yeah, I know, like, or the experience of like someone shows up in totally wrinkly clothes and then they want you to edit out all their
Yeah.
wrinkles. Like
Yeah.
those,
That's a
yeah,
great point that I would never have thought about unless I had like a really bad experience where I had to edit like 60 images
yeah.
of them doing that.
And if you don't have, if your contract doesn't say, I won't do that, that doesn't mean that you have to do it. You can still you can reasonably fill in gaps, because no contract is going to do, no contract is going to answer every possible scenario. So you can always say, you know what, that is your fault. And it's reasonable for me to say that it's your fault that you did not iron your clothes before you came. I will do that for a fee. Even if your contract doesn't say that, you can do that.
Okay.
But it is so helpful when it's in your contract and you can write back to your client and say, dear client, like, thank you so much for your request. Yeah, for the contract, like, I will invoice you $60 or whatever, that's really nice. So anyway, those are that's the meat of the contract, is the stuff about how you do business, what your client needs to do to make the project a success. Then there's the part of the contract that's lawyers call the boilerplate. Those are the terms that can be a little bit hard to read, but usually the IP, the assignment of IP rights, the image use rights if you're a photographer, or the design use rights, or the copy use rights come in there in the IP section. A liability waiver that protects you from personal injury lawsuits. So like if your client gets hurt when you provide in-person services, or if your client's data is breached, if you are an online service provider, or all of that. That stuff is hard to write as a non-lawyer, or hard to understand as a non-lawyer, but it prevents the most expensive kinds of mistakes, right? Like, it sucks when you have to edit somebody's images because you didn't set their expectations about what editing was included, but it doesn't suck as much as when you get sued for like $30,000 because somebody gets injured, right? And
Yeah.
it's really rare. It's really rare, but having a lawyer just like make sure that you have the right liability waiver in there is helpful. And then also policies about what happens if there is a dispute with your client. Are you going to go to mediation? Are you going to go to small claims court? You're going to go to arbitration, and what state's law governs the contract. Everything that is boring and that only lawyers would think about. That's the boilerplate. And then at the bottom, there's usually a signature block. You can have just terms of use that people accept by paying an invoice, or people accept by checking a box on a website. But for more formal contracts, a signature block where you sign. And again, you want to sign, if you have an LLC, you want to sign on behalf of your LLC.
Okay.
So like my business I have an LLC and a trade name. So I would have to sign Allie Moore, member, Allie Moore LLC, doing business as Creatives Learn Law. And that member, that's the word that you use to show that you're signing in the capacity of the representative of your LLC.
Mhm.
And then your client signs. If you're giving the image rights or design rights or copyright for writing to your client's business, you want your client to also sign as a representative of their business so that
Okay.
it's clear that it's a business to business contract. Otherwise, if they're just an individual, then they can just sign their own name. But making sure you have the right people signing in the right way is also really helpful. And yeah, that's the high level of how I approach contracts for small business owners.
Okay, and this may be like a silly question, but
Oh,
like say if I'm sending an online contract, does it matter which party signs first? Because I guess I just have like this like ridiculous thing that I'm like, well, if they change something in the contract and then I've already signed it and then they sign it, then is that like, does that change
yeah.
anything or like how does that work?
So if they, okay, so online is a little bit different because usually if they want to change the contract, you're gonna do a whole new contract, right? Because
Okay.
most online signature systems don't allow them to make
Okay.
changes.
There we go.
Like you're just gonna have to do it again. On paper, what you can do is just like initial, right?
Okay.
So like anywhere that anybody like crosses something out and writes something else in, you can both just initial right where that is.
Where like you both have seen the changes, you're
Yeah.
good to go.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, like, as a high level rule, there's almost no formality required for any contract. Not true of like real estate, right? If you've ever bought a house, there is a very specific process you follow for real estate contracts. But for any other contract, you can, as long as a court would look at it and say, oh, these are the terms the parties agreed to, nothing else really matters. So, for example, sitting down in a restaurant and ordering off a menu creates a contract. You have agreed to pay for food and they have agreed to bring you food. So,
Mm,
so that I use that as an example because it shows you sort of how broad the
yeah.
world of contract law is. So, you don't necessarily have to sign your own contracts. You could just have a signature block for your clients
Okay.
because of course you accepted the terms, you gave the terms to your clients. Sometimes,
Right.
signing contracts can like tie it up with the nice bow, but it might not be necessary.
Okay.
Yeah. And
Okay. All right.
you can sign before or after your client.
Okay. That clears up that panic for me. The
Good.
like unreasonable, anxiety from it. Okay. So, and then I'm assuming that when you say like the boilerplate, is that like if you were to buy a template online, that's just kind of a general, this is for copywriters, this is for photographers, here's a general thing. Like, is that boilerplate what we get? And then we have to fill in the top two parts or like the top,
Yeah.
what we
So when you
expect and all that?
Totally. When you buy a template contract, like from a shop that's specifically for your industry, usually that's all going to be filled in. So
Okay.
it's going to set up what you provide to your clients. It's going to set up your clients' expectations, and it's going to have what I call the boilerplate. But for those top two parts, it's just going to use industry standard or what the person who wrote that contract thinks of as industry standard.
Okay.
And then it will have like some blanks where they highlight for you to put in like how many images you deliver and when your retainer is due and like those kinds of things. But usually,
More fill in the blank. Yeah.
and the person who wrote that contract is deciding for you what all of your business policies are going to be. And then you can look at it and change it. But
Okay. So do we need to have like, do we still need to hire a lawyer to look over those? Like, I
yeah,
mean, how much should we trust the templates online
okay,
that
so
you buy versus like the one that you just find that's like a general
yeah,
one, which that's
totally.
what I'm.
Okay, so if you're going to buy a contract online, please buy one from a shop run by a lawyer. I have seen some very bad contracts purchased from other service providers, so like that photographers have bought from other photographers, or that copywriters have bought from other copywriters. Lawyers are very highly regulated. So even though selling templates isn't the practice of law, like if you got a template from a lawyer and it was just garbage, you'd have more recourse than if you just bought it from, another business owner. So yeah, buy from a lawyer. There are some really reputable people out there selling very good contracts. Every single one of them is going to tell you need to have it reviewed by a lawyer in your state because you cannot write a template that complies with the laws of all 50 states. If you live in a state like California, it is worth it to get that contract reviewed because California law is very specific, very consumer friendly, and pretty complicated. if you live in a state like Colorado that tends to be a little bit more libertarian, has like a less complex set of laws, like the Midwest, the West, Southern states, the lawyer who sells you the contract is still going to say you need to have this reviewed by a lawyer. This is not a substitute for legal services. That's their duty to do that, because they can't tell you that you can just opt out of one-on-one legal consultation, and they're doing it to protect themselves. But there's not that much state law that changes if you don't live in a state where there's a lot of regulations. So chances are, if you are in Colorado like we are, and you buy a contract prepared by somebody, like my friend Paige Griffin sells contracts. She's a Montana-based attorney. If you buy a contract from Paige, you probably don't need it reviewed for Colorado law. There's going to be a few things that are a little bit different. Our bounced check fee in Colorado is capped at $20. That's just like a weird example. But for the most part, it's probably going to be okay. The biggest benefit you're going to get from working one-on-one with the lawyer is that you get to sit down and write the contract the way you want it to be. It's going to be reflective of your business policies. I worry much more about that than I do about it complying with Colorado law. Like I mentioned, if you live in California, then I think you should get a contract written by a California lawyer. There are other states too, like Massachusetts, New York, where there tend to be a lot of consumer protection laws. But in other states, for the most part, that disclaimer about getting it reviewed by a lawyer in your state is a disclaimer to protect the person who sells the contract. And chances are there's not going to be a ton of state law differences.
Okay, that's really good to know. I mean, so kind of for us out here in the Midwest area, you're probably good to
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
there.
I will say too, like if you can find a small business lawyer that knows your industry, like it's like I charge $750 for like a pretty complex, like a wedding contract. I
Mhm.
charge less than that for like a portrait session contract. Um, and that's actually pretty competitive with people who sell templates. So it might be worth it for you
Yeah.
to just investigate.
Yeah, I mean, and especially like for other photographers in the Denver area, like Allie was a photographer, so she knows a lot of situations that, I mean, she probably knows even more situations because not only has she worked with photographer clients, but she's also been a photographer herself, so she kind of can add all those things together to make like a foolproof one. So definitely, I highly recommend that. It's on my list. I'm working on it. So, okay, like then if you're kind of working on updating, like how long do these contracts last? Like if you're updating an old contract, do you just need to like scrap it and like do a new one? Like how often is this expense, you know?
Yeah. So, I mean, 2020 just throws all for a loop. I think pretty much everybody needs an update. Not everybody. Everybody who provides in-person services needs
Yeah.
a contract update right now.
Okay.
Or if they
Okay.
haven't done it yet this year, they need one, because you need a COVID liability waiver. You need reschedule policies for COVID. You need to set expectations related to COVID, and that is like a big area of business liability that totally came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
In general, I think people should update their contracts when they make big changes in their business. So we all make changes to our business model from time to time. And every time that you do that, it makes sense to update your contract to make sure that it's reflective of your business model. I think at the end of every year, it would be awesome if everybody took a few minutes to reflect on all of the bad client experiences they had in the past year and whether any of those things should be reflected in their contract. And not every bad client experience should be in your contract. Sometimes you just get something totally out of left field, and you
Hmm.
don't need to write a paragraph in your contract about this one person that had this really bizarre preference. But sometimes you're like, oh, I could see that coming up again, and then it's worth the contract.
Okay, so that's a great point. And then Gigi asked, like, would you update the whole contract or just write up an addendum to the original? When do you know, like, how do you know when you need to
Mhm.
scrap the entire thing and just start over?
Yeah. So you do not want to scrap the entire thing and start. Once you get a contract you feel good about and confident about, the only reason I would scrap the entire thing and start over would be because I changed my business model. Like if I just totally changed the way I do business, I'd scrap it and start over. Usually people are scrapping their contracts with me and starting over because they've never gotten a contract they felt comfortable with. Like they bought one online and they didn't really understand it and they just went with it. Or they copied and pasted a bunch of stuff together to try to make something that fit their business, but they were never confident in that it did what they want.
Right.
So as it goes for like annual updates, even with COVID, if people had a contract they liked, or if I wrote your contract in 2019 I've just added to your existing contract. I
Okay.
have not like scrapped whole contracts. But and you mentioned addendum, and I just wanted to be clear that an addendum is like a separate page usually, right?
Mhm.
So they'll sign the main contract and then they'll sign the addendum. Usually when you're updating your contract, you're just going to integrate those changes into your existing contract. So you just
Okay.
like edit a paragraph, take one out, put one in. But
So they're not signing multiple things.
yeah, you may
Okay.
decide for COVID that that's what you want to do because it's easier for you to have like regular contract, COVID addendum, than to make COVID edits into your regular contract and then have to go back.
Mhm.
Um, but I've been working with my clients to just update their current contract to include those COVID policies, and then they can just take those paragraphs out whenever it is that we can take those things out.
One day.
Hopefully next year. I don't know.
Yeah,
The year
maybe.
after.
I don't know. Okay. Well, and then, so Gigi's a photographer. I'm a photographer. So, and I think this is kind of a really typical path of photographers where you start out, you give them everything. And then once you kind of figure out, like, I want to make more money, then you start doing like your sitting fee and then pay per image.
Yeah.
Is that a considered a business model change, or is that just something as simple? Okay. So that's when you would need another contract too, or like a new
And
contract.
yes, you still might be able to edit your existing contract because some things are going to be the same, but
Yes.
that's a significant enough change that I would say it would be worth it to work with a lawyer because you're going to make money from your intellectual property rights in a way that you weren't before. So you want to make sure those intellectual property rights are really well defined,
Yes.
and the consequences for violating them are also well defined. So that's a time when I'd be like worth it to consult with the lawyer to make those changes.
Okay. And then that kind of brings up another question of just like, what does this relationship look like between you and your lawyer? Like, if I come up to you and say, like, hey, this is kind of what I'm thinking of where I want to go, but I don't really know what that looks like. Is that something where you're like, I mean, especially if you've worked in the industry and you're kind of familiar with it, that you can be like, well, if you do this, then here's what I recommend for these services. And then like, let's put this in here too. Like, is that like a relationship, or do I just tell you, hey, I need this, and then you make it for me? Like, how does
Yeah,
that work?
good question, and totally going to vary lawyer to lawyer. So that's a question you like want to ask somebody when you're hiring them. Like, what does the drafting process look like, or how do we collaborate? For me, so I do 15-minute free consults to onboard drafting clients. I stopped doing free consults for disputes because a lot of times with disputes, like I like have to really dig into stuff, but I do free consults for drafting clients. And we like you tell me, you know, what you want out of your business model, and I tell you like what I think that would look like on paper, and I quote a price. Um, and then I put together basically like if you had bought a template online, I put together a template like that based on what business model you told me you want. And then we meet and we go through that template paragraph by paragraph. I make sure you understand all of it and that we edit, you know, whatever's in there that's not right for you, we edit it. And then my goal is for my clients to feel like they own their contracts so that when their clients write back and are like, I don't understand this force majeure clause, or I can't agree to this model release, you know exactly what's in there, and you know if you can say to your client, oh, no problem, let's edit it, or sorry, you're gonna need to hire somebody else.
Okay, I think that's a really great point, especially when you're like working with a client, like with a lawyer. You don't really know what to expect because it's just like the whole process is can be kind of intimidating, and you're like, it's a lot per hour. Like, it's not, obviously, I think it's all worth it because it protects
Those were
you,
expensive.
but it's a
I'm like a
lot.
chief lawyer and I'm still very expensive. Like, you know,
I mean, it's just it's an expense that you're like, I wanted to just pay rent and be done this
yeah,
month, you
yeah,
know.
and
So
totally,
you're kind of scared to like check
yeah.
into it and all that. So I think that's really helpful to kind of know that that can kind of be a relationship, and also it's like the education aspect of like, this is what is happening, and you know,
Yeah.
it makes it easier to work with clients, I think, too.
Totally. Yeah. And I will say too, like I bill flat fee and more small business lawyers bill flat fee for drafting.
Mhm.
But hourly is still the predominant model in the legal world, and like $200 an hour is an average lawyer's hourly rate.
Okay.
Our hourly rates are a little bit less than that, but it's the most expensive consultant. A lawyer and a CPA are going to be the most expensive outside people that you're going to hire in your business.
Yeah, and I mean, and that makes sense too because, you know, they're protecting you from the government and from everyone else. So, okay, so I feel like that's great on contracts. If y'all have questions on that, we can jump back, let me know. Hopping back to like stock photography, because I think, that's a thing, like there's the option to buy or hire a photographer to take your pictures. And then there's the option to buy stock photography. Do those usage rights change? Like, do you have full usage rights for that? Can you use it in whatever way, even if you're selling something with those photos in it? What does that look like?
Yeah, so just like when you work with a photographer, the question is going to be entirely what are the terms of use for the image.
Mhm.
So usually you're going to find those. So like we use Unsplash a lot on our Instagram feed
Mhm.
because we just cannot keep up with pictures, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
you
I mean,
go to
even Canva
Unsplash.
has like a
Yeah,
free section
yeah.
too. So
Yep.
yeah.
So you want to go and find the terms of service or the terms of use on that website and read what you can and can't do. And they really try hard to make it clear, right? To make it not be in legalese, but to say these are the things you can do, these are the things you can't do. And pretty much in every instance, you are not going to be able to sell that image. So you can't turn around and make your own stock photo site that people pay for access to.
Right. Right.
Whether or not you can sell something that has that image on it is, that's something you're going to want to look at. If you're
Okay.
using Unsplash or
Like
Canva.
I think that are you in Social Curator?
I'm not, but I know familiar with the concept. I think it's a great idea.
Well, so that's like a monthly thing where they give you 30 days of images. I haven't looked to see what their terms are, but it's like, it's really great for a PowerPoint presentation. And if you're, selling an online course and you've got this PowerPoint presentation, so you're technically making money from that course and that photo, kind of, but it's not like flat out here by this photo. Like,
Yeah,
how is that okay? You have to
totally.
go check it?
Gotta go check it. I would be very surprised because the way that Social Curator like markets themselves is that they're trying to give you images to use in your business. I would be very surprised if that kind of use is not allowed, because
Okay.
basically anything that you're like, oh, that's gut check, like that's a normal thing that a business owner would want to do with these images, and that's really subjective, so that's not foolproof. Like you need to go read the terms and then assess.
Hmm.
But in general, like putting it in a PowerPoint, even if you charge access for people to view the PowerPoint, putting it on your social media feed, putting it on your website, that's what people expect to be able to do when they sign up
Okay.
for social curators. So that makes me guess that those things are allowed.
Okay.
Printing that image on a t-shirt and then selling the t-shirt, like just gut check. I'm like, that's questionable. I would want to make sure that that was allowed.
Well, I mean, and I think that shows like, is it the main focus or is it just like
Yeah.
for the core of the thing that you're selling? So that's a really good point. And then like if we see something online and we just kind of take a screenshot and then
Yeah, we're not
credit
doing
it,
that.
don't do that.
Don't do that. Don't do that.
What
If
about it? What if it's for exposure, Allie? Like,
Right? I know. I when you use the native share, so like on Instagram, if you share somebody's post to your story,
mhm,
Instagram has cleared that for you because people have accepted that in their terms of use, that when they upload their image, that can happen. Or when you retweet, or when you share a Facebook post or share a LinkedIn post, you can do that stuff freely. And it's not your fault if the person who originally uploaded it infringed copyright. Like that's gonna be a problem with the person who originally uploaded it and with the platform.
okay.
Um, but if you are downloading things, screenshotting things, you need to make sure that you have permission, or that you either like you got specific permission from the creator, or that you got it from a place where there are terms of use that say that that's allowed. So even like on Flickr, you can turn on a Creative Commons search.
Okay.
So like then that they told the platform that you could use that image for certain things, but you can't just get on Google Images. Even if you give credit, you can't do that.
Okay. Okay. That's good to know because I'm like, "Meh."
Hard stop, hard stop.
We learn and then we change. So,
Same thing with
okay.
music, right? Music, like if you buy something on iTunes, does not mean that you've bought the right to put it on your business website or to put it on your client slideshow. You need to get a license for
Okay.
music.
Okay. Okay. Cool. And then that kind of leads into this question, which this was kind of mentioned in a photography group, which is why I bring it up because I'm like, I would have never thought of that. Uh, I mean, that's maybe good or bad, but like for murals in the background, like when you're out taking pictures of yourself for like branding. So if you're DIYing, so we've kind of talked about like hiring somebody, taking your own, buying stock. Okay. When you're taking your own and there's like a cool wall in the background. Is that a thing? Like,
Yes,
what do you do
totally.
there? Like, are you
Yeah.
supposed to pay these people? Or are you supposed to tag them or what? Like,
Yeah.
how does
So
that work?
the safest thing to do if you're going to take a branding picture with the mural in the background, and usually like mural artists will have their Instagram or Twitter handle in the bot, like they often do that. Or you can maybe find like on the city's, on your city's website, if they have a public art map, or reach out and ask them if you can use it, because they do have rights that prevent you from using that image for your profit without their permission. There's like a TV show, I can't remember what TV show it was, but they had, for like a couple seasons, they had a painting in the background of the living room,
Mhm.
and they got sued for a huge amount of money by the artist because they put like this, like this
Yeah.
artist, like I hope that this person, I didn't mean to do it. I hope they're okay with it, but like this, if I was like selling a video or using for promotional
Yeah.
purposes, like a picture of me in this room with this behind me, like I would need that person's permission. uh
That's that I would have just not I would not have made that connection. Like
yeah.
a lot of us, if we're taking pictures in our house, we're like, it's safe. So then does that mean like, I mean, because Amy Porterfield, she talks about having like some decor, a plant, stuff like that. I mean, so if you have some artwork behind you, which I mean, like I've got some stuff back there, like
You got your wedding picture back there? Yeah.
it's a wedding picture, and then the other one is
Yeah.
for my sister, so she's fine. But like, so you can't have artwork, or if you do, you have to get their permission, or is that kind of just like if it's not big enough, if it's not on a Netflix channel, then is that okay? Like, I don't
It's
know.
definitely safer, right? Like stuff that's not making it very far, it's definitely safer. Reaching out to people, especially like this, the person who did this is like a local Colorado artist. Like if I was actually gonna, this is a coincidence, so this is behind me, but like if I was really like wanting to put a picture on my website of me with this picture, like I would email that person, and they would probably like 9 times out of 10 be like, sure, that'd be great. Like, can you link to
Yeah.
the website? So that's always the easiest thing to do. Um, there's a test called fair use. Like you have to determine you can use other people's protected materials if it's for a fair use purpose. So those are purposes like criticism, news reporting, teaching, research. So like if I was teaching a class about local artists and I taught about this painting, I could display this painting. But if it
Okay.
just appears behind me, and then let's just say like I took a picture of me here on my desk with this behind me, and then the picture went viral and like 5 million people saw it on Instagram because I don't know, there's a great quote or something in the caption, then this person could come after me because this is not fair use. I'm not teaching you about this picture. Now I kind of am,
Mhm.
but like this isn't for the
Right, right.
purposes of criticism. It just doesn't count as fair use. So yeah, whenever you're using pictures like for advertising or promotional purposes, you want to be careful about what's in the background.
Okay.
But it's, a plant, even though somebody made and sold that plant, even if it's a fake
Different.
plant, like that's probably not going to be an issue. But if you have a huge wall mural that you
Had
are
somebody like you
proud of,
commissioned somebody.
yeah, then you want to check in with that person because it's not fair use.
Okay, so Lori asked, like, what about those like really Instagrammable murals that it's like their whole intention for creating it was so you take a picture of it, like the wings and stuff
Yeah,
like that. Like,
totally,
what, I mean,
totally.
is that
And
necessary, or is that just like they will sign the bottom and then that's in the picture and then
yeah,
that suffices?
so again, like if you're just putting it on your personal Instagram and you don't have a business and you don't monetize your Instagram, then they're probably gonna have a pretty hard time arguing that you've like it's out there in public. You can take a personal picture of yourself in front of it. But if you're using it to advertise your business, you should just shoot them a message. The chances are very good that it will never be an issue, but it has been an issue for a few people. And so I would recommend that you just shoot that person a message and you just say, hey, like I took this picture, I love it. Are you okay if I share it in these ways and tag you when I share it?
Okay.
That's just the safest thing to do. Um, yeah. And if you're not going to do that, you can tag them and like shout them out and tell them what a nice mural it is. What I would not do is I would not fail to tag the mural artist and then geotag your picture, because then you're inviting them to find the place
Oh,
for you.
yeah.
where you did not respect their intellectual property rights.
And who holds the responsibility of this all? Like, is it the photographer who took the picture? Is it the person who actually is showing up in the picture and they
Yeah,
requested it? Like, who's at fault here?
totally. It's gonna be both the photographer and the person posting the picture, because in the instance that we're talking about, both people are getting a commercial benefit, right? The photographer got paid to take the picture and they used the mural in that picture they got paid to take. And then the person posting it posted it to promote their business. So either one of those people could be on the hook. If it's just a friend who like took a cell phone picture for you after brunch, or if you're just posting it on your personal page,
Right.
then both those are probably going to be okay. But
Okay.
just ask for, I think that mural artists are typically appreciative of the shout out for their work. But they definitely would prefer to be asked before
Okay.
they have to remind you that you are infringing their intellectual property rights.
Oh, yeah,
I
these
know
I
public art is really complicated.
they're stressful too. I mean, like as a photographer, I'm always looking for interesting backgrounds and I'm like, "Oh man, that's like one more thing that you have to do."
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. And then this is just kind of wrapping up and you can go as deep into this or not as you want, but like is there just a bare bones minimum that I need to run my business without getting sued?
Yeah. Okay. So actually, I have four steps you want to take to run your business.
Okay.
We can't prevent lawsuits, right? Because people can file frivolous lawsuits whenever they want. I won't name any names, but some people are known for frivolous lawsuits.
I wonder who that's I wonder who you're referring to.
So anybody can file a lawsuit about whatever they want, but we can set you up so that you are unlikely to lose a lawsuit. We can set you up so that you're unlikely to lose out financially, even if you lose a lawsuit.
Okay.
So first, I like people to create a limited liability entity like an LLC or a corporation. LLCs are the easiest because that
So you're
separates
not
it.
a sole proprietor fan.
Yeah, if you're, and it's okay. It's like it's not magic to have an LLC. But typically it's easy to form an LLC and you get to separate your business assets from your personal assets for
Mhm.
any kind of lawsuit, like contract lawsuit against your business. So it costs $50 to do it in Colorado. I have a guide on my homepage for free if you want help doing that. It's creativeslearn.com. But so setting up an LLC is one, buying insurance two. So you want general commercial liability. If you provide any sort of in-person services, that's what's going to step in if somebody trips and falls or gets injured by your equipment. If you're only doing online services, you probably want like a digital policy that protects you in case of data breach or in case of some of the IP infringement we've been talking about. And then three is to get a contract that you feel really good about, that you feel like it sets your client's expectations in a good way and it protects you from liability to the greatest extent possible. And then four is you have to, even with all those three things in place, you have to act reasonably, take calculated risks. Sometimes we have to just, give in to annoying clients because we want them to go away, and that's okay. That's a reasonable decision to make. So just always evaluating things in terms of, do I want this to turn into a dispute? Do I want this to hang out over my head, or can I put this to bed easily? That's the fourth thing. And if you are doing those four things and you don't work in a really regulated industry, so like you don't sell marijuana, you don't practice physical therapy, like then you're pretty much covered. If you're in a regulated industry, you also need to really be good with your regulator.
Okay. Is there anything that is really like different in terms of in person versus online, like courses, or if they're doing coaching or stuff like that? I mean, you said the digital
Yeah,
liability
different
part.
kinds of insurance, definitely different kinds of insurance. Um, I didn't talk about taxes. That's kind of the other component of what you need to do to make sure you're not, asleep on the job as a business owner. But like the tax obligations are different for in-person versus online services sometimes, especially in terms of sales tax across states. But otherwise, like pretty much those same four steps for both.
Okay. Is the sales tax something that we chat with you about, or is that like a CPA thing?
Yeah, I can definitely talk about sales tax, and it's both. It's both. your best bet if you're confused about sales tax is a bookkeeper, because they are going to have the lowest hourly rate, and
Okay.
they typically are going to be experienced in getting a sales tax license and in paying sales tax. And then you just engage a CPA or a lawyer when your bookkeeper and you aren't clear on the regulatory um, obligations.
Okay, and so that's interesting because I've definitely had CPAs in the past where they don't know anything about photography, and like the idea of a digital file is confusing to them. Like they're like, that's not like something that you get taxed on. But then I've looked up,
Yeah.
online, and I'm like, no, I think you do get taxed. Like I think I'm supposed to pay tax on it.
Yeah,
So
in general, I think there's definitely something to be said for working with somebody who knows your industry, right? Which is can be hard, but there are absolutely more of us now than there
Mhm.
have been in the past. That like lawyers, CPAs, bookkeepers that know the creative fields. And there is like Colorado has a couple different pieces of guidance about sales tax and digital images.
Okay,
It's a mess.
so
It's a mess, but
oh no, I know that that's totally great. I'm thinking about this talk, and when we first set up this conversation, I was like, I don't know like what questions to ask because like I don't know what I don't know. And
you asked the right questions.
I'm like going through and I'm like, we have like I'll just show you like this is like a lot of questions here that we worked on and we talked about. I'm so appreciative of like all of this information that you've given us. If
Pleasure.
y'all have questions, again, drop them in there. We're kind of wrapping up. Allie, tell us about your business, what you're all about. Where can we find you? Anything? Do you offer the templates, or are you more like just meet up with me and like let's come up with something?
Yeah, so far, let's see. I've been in business for about 18 months, having my own firm. And so far we've really heavily focused on like one-on-one contract drafting, because I think there's so much value in that. But we do have a couple of templates on our website for like smaller. So like we have an associate shooter template and a styled shoot template for photographers. But for the client contract, so far we've been doing one-on-one drafting. I mentioned sort of the price range for that is usually like $400 to $750 for a
Mhm.
contract, and it's pretty hands-on process. You can find us at creativeslearn.com.
And
Or
I'll drop that link in
oh,
there, everybody.
yeah, we do a ton of tips on Instagram too, which is at Creatives Learn Law. But we are also early next year, we're working on launching some video supported templates because I think this education component is so important. I didn't want to just put like more templates out into the world that people don't understand. So we're going to try, we're going to try before January 1st to get at least 3 different templates together for different industries that have video step by step walking you through each of the clauses so that you can still take ownership of a template, but that we have a few less meetings to go do with people. So we're working on that for early next year. If that's of interest to you, at the bottom of our homepage, there's an email list and you can sign up, and we will definitely keep our email list informed about when we launch that.
And also like she has like a course, like a free training, right,
Oh
for
yeah.
wedding vendors.
Yep.
And then like another one coming up, which it's inclusivity in your marketing, which and she has the same girl that Amy Porterfield, which I'm like, girl, like you're getting some like high class people up here.
We hired her. She deserves to be paid. We
So of
hired
course
her. No.
she deserves to be paid, but I'm like,
Yeah.
she's giving you like great content for $14, I think is that correct?
Yeah, we're super excited. So Sonia Thompson is an expert. She used to work for Johnson and Johnson, like big marketing
Yes.
expert on how to include people in your marketing. So whether that's race or disability or people who are gluten free or people who are left-handed, like how to make sure that you aren't using too much default body or default people in your advertising, and that you're making people feel welcome by the messages that you put out there. So she's going to speak with us next week. $14. I think it's going to be awesome. And then on November 20th, I'm teaching a class about liability protection for wedding vendors. That's free. And then we do a lot of classes. So definitely feel free to join the mailing list or Instagram. And I would say like at least once every 2 weeks, we got some kind of free class.
No, I mean, I think that's amazing. For your clients, would you say that you mainly work with photographers, or do you think you kind of work with anybody in the creative field? Like Lori is a copywriter, for
Yeah,
example.
I do work with copywriters. So I work primarily with service providers. So a lot of photographers, just because I know the industry really well, but graphic designers, consultants, coaches, people who provide services to their clients. We do some product-based businesses too, but I think I have a lot to offer in terms of client contracts for service providers. My business partner is a yoga teacher, and she helps a lot of wellness professionals. So health coaches, therapists, yoga teachers, yoga studio owners. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much. And I'm sorry, what?
I just said thanks,
Oh,
Mattis.
yeah. Yeah, no, I am so appreciative. This is like totally made so much of this like clearer in terms of what I should be doing and not doing and all those things. So I am so appreciative. I will definitely drop all these links in our comments below. And yeah, and if you have questions, Allie is in the group. So
Yeah.
can I tag you? Because I tried to tag, okay, and it wasn't like going through. So I'm not sure if there's like, if I just did it wrong.
Not because of me, I hope. I don't know.
I'll check it. But if you guys have questions, we'll tag Allie in it and then she can like kind of work with you. And then if you do the go to her website and everything, you can sign up for her email and she'll give all of this information of her free classes and everything, which I think is really cool that she incorporates that education aspect on top of it. So anyway, thank you guys so much for being here today. And I will talk to you guys soon.
Thanks, Madison. It's always great talking to you.
It is too great. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Appreciate it.